The candles flickered against the crystal glasses as I set the last plate on our dining room table. 5 years of marriage, and I'd cooked every anniversary dinner myself. Tonight was no different. Herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, homemade bread still warm from the oven. The apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic, the kind of aroma that should have made anyone grateful. "Jared, this is beautiful," my mother-in-law said as she settled into her chair. Margaret Solis had always been kind to me, even when her daughter wasn't. "Thank you, Margaret. I wanted tonight to be special." I pulled out Zara's chair and waited for her to sit. She was checking her phone as usual, her manicured nails tapping against the screen. "Zara, honey, put that away," her father said. "This is your anniversary." She finally looked up, surveying the table with the same expression she might give a restaurant that had disappointed her. Tessa, her best friend, was already digging into the bread, making appreciative noises. Reed, Tessa's boyfriend, nodded approvingly at the wine selection. "This looks nice, Jared," Zara said, but there was something flat in her voice. She picked up her fork and poked at the salmon. "Although—" She paused and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. "This looks like scraps. My ex always ordered real food." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Margaret's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Tessa's chewing slowed. Reed suddenly found his wine glass fascinating. I stood there for a moment, processing what my wife had just said, in front of our friends, in front of her parents, about a meal I'd spent 3 hours preparing, about food I'd bought with money I'd earned restoring classic cars 12 hours a day. "Scraps," I repeated quietly. "I mean, it's fine," Zara continued, apparently not reading the room. "But remember how Marcus used to take me to that place downtown? The one with the real chef? Now that was food worth celebrating with." Marcus. Her ex-boyfriend who dumped her for a younger woman 2 months before she met me. The same Marcus she brought up whenever she wanted to remind me that I wasn't quite enough. I looked around the table. Margaret was staring at her plate. Tessa was texting, probably already spreading the story to her social media followers. Reed was checking his watch, and Zara was cutting her salmon into tiny pieces, still talking about Marcus and his superior restaurant choices. Something inside me went very quiet and very still. "You're right," I said, walking to the head of the table. "This is scraps." I picked up my plate, the herb-crusted salmon I'd seasoned perfectly, the vegetables I'd roasted until they caramelized just right, and walked to the kitchen. I opened the trash can and scraped everything in. The satisfying thud of good food hitting the garbage bag felt like punctuation. "Jared, what are you doing?" Margaret asked. I returned to the dining room and collected Zara's plate next. She looked up at me with confusion, but I was already moving, gathering Reed's plate, then Tessa's, then Margaret's, then her father's. Each plate went into the trash. The salmon, the vegetables, the bread I'd kneaded by hand that morning. "Jared, stop," Zara said, standing up. "I didn't mean—" "Scraps," I said, collecting the serving dishes. "All of it, just scraps." The wine went next. The good bottle I'd been saving, the one from our honeymoon in Napa, down the sink, the bread basket, the salad, the chocolate cake I'd planned to surprise her with. Everything. "You've lost your mind," Zara said, but her voice had changed. There was uncertainty there now. I walked to the light switch and turned off the chandelier. The candles still flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. "Happy anniversary, Zara," I said. "Enjoy your evening." I walked to the bedroom, grabbed my keys and wallet from the dresser, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Zara calling my name, her voice rising with each repetition. I could hear Tessa whispering something urgent. I could hear Margaret trying to mediate. I didn't look back. The hallway outside our apartment was blessedly quiet. Mr. Halberd, the doorman, was at his desk in the lobby when I reached the ground floor. "Evening, Mr. Solis. Leaving already?" Evening, Henry. Yes, I have some business to attend to. He nodded, probably assuming I was making a late run to the store for dessert or champagne. If only he knew I was walking away from 5 years of marriage over a plate of salmon. My truck was parked across the street, a 1987 Ford pickup I'd restored myself, painted deep blue with chrome bumpers that actually gleamed. Zara hated it. She said it was embarrassing, that it made her look poor when I picked her up from work. She preferred when I drove her BMW, the one I'd bought her for her birthday last year. I climbed into the truck and sat there for a moment, engine off, looking up at our apartment windows. The lights were back on. I could see shadows moving around inside, probably cleaning up the mess I'd made, probably talking about how I'd snapped, probably calling me crazy. My phone buzzed. A text from Zara. "Come back. We need to talk." I turned off the phone and started the engine. The drive out of the city took 45 minutes in the rain that had started falling while I sat in the truck. I knew exactly where I was going, even though I hadn't planned this moment. Maybe part of me had been planning it for months without realizing it. Helena Trenwall lived in a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Old money. The kind that didn't need to show off because everyone already knew it was there. I'd met her 6 months ago when she brought her 1965 Mustang to my shop for restoration. We'd talked about cars, about craftsmanship, about the satisfaction of building something beautiful with your own hands. She'd also mentioned, almost in passing, that she owned several properties around the city, including some upscale apartments, including the one where Zara and I lived. I pulled into her driveway and sat there for a moment, rain drumming on the truck's roof. This was insane. I was about to involve a near stranger in the collapse of my marriage. But Helena had given me her card, had told me to call if I ever needed anything. And tonight, I needed something. The porch light came on before I reached the door. "Jared?" Helena opened the door, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine. "What are you doing here?" "I need to ask you a favor," I said. "A big one." She studied my face for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. You look like you've had an interesting evening." Her living room was all dark wood and leather, the kind of understated elegance that Zara tried to imitate with her designer furniture and expensive accessories. Helena gestured to a chair by the fireplace. "Drink? Please." She poured me 3 fingers of something that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. It burned in the best possible way. "So," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "what kind of favor are we talking about?" I told her everything. The dinner, the comment about scraps, the way Zara had invoked her ex-boyfriend's name like a weapon, the way she'd dismissed 3 hours of my work in front of people who mattered to both of us. Helena listened without interrupting, occasionally sipping her wine. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The apartment lease is in my name," she said finally. "Zara's name isn't on any of the paperwork. I assume you know that?" I did know that. When we'd moved in 3 years ago, Zara's credit had been questionable. I'd asked Helena to put the lease in her name as a favor, with the understanding that I'd handle all payments and responsibilities. The concierge services, the parking spot, the gym membership, all of that is tied to the lease, Helena continued, which means it's tied to my authorization. "Yes." "And you're the one who's been paying for everything." "Yes." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp green eyes that had probably closed more business deals than most people attempted in a lifetime. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Jared?" I took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to help me take back everything I've given her. Everything that's mine. Everything that's yours. I want her to understand what scraps really look like." Helena smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "You know, I've never liked your wife. She's rude to my doorman, dismissive to the cleaning staff, and she once complained to the building management about the quality of tenant I was allowing in my property. Apparently, Mrs. Henderson's grandson visits too often for her taste." Mrs. Henderson was 84 years old and lived alone. Her grandson was a college student who helped her with groceries. "I didn't know that," I said. "There's a lot you don't know about how your wife behaves when you're not around." Helena finished her wine and set the glass aside. "But I know. The staff knows. The other tenants know." She stood up and walked to a desk in the corner, pulling out a thick folder. "Building management keeps detailed records of complaints, maintenance requests, and tenant interactions. Your wife has generated quite a file." I thought about all the times Zara had come home complaining about the slow elevator, the noisy neighbors, the inadequate cleaning service. I'd assumed she was just particular about her living standards. It had never occurred to me that she might be taking out her frustrations on people who couldn't fight back. "So, yes," Helena said, returning to her chair. "I'll help you, but I want you to understand what you're asking for. Once we start this, there's no going back. Your marriage will be over." "It's already over," I said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Helena picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I'll start making calls tomorrow morning. Building management, concierge services, parking authority. By the time I'm finished, every service tied to that apartment will require direct authorization from me." "What about her cards? The joint accounts?" "That's your department, but I'd suggest moving quickly. Once she realizes what's happening, she'll try to drain everything she can access." I nodded. I'd been thinking about that during the drive over. Zara had access to our joint checking account, but most of our assets were in accounts that required my signature. The credit cards were in my name, with her as an authorized user. "There's something else," Helena said. "Something you should know before you commit to this path." "What?" "Your wife has been bringing men to the apartment. Men who aren't you." The words hit me like cold water. I'd suspected, of course. The late nights at work, the mysterious phone calls, the way she'd grown distant over the past year. But suspecting and knowing were different things. "How do you know?" "Henry keeps logs of all visitors. Building security policy. Your wife has been entertaining a gentleman named Voss quite regularly. Usually on Thursday afternoons when you're at the shop." Voss. I knew that name. He worked in finance, drove a white Tesla, and had been to several of Zara's work parties. She'd introduced him as a colleague, someone she worked with on budget analysis. "Thursday afternoons," I repeated. "For the past 3 months, always the same time, always the same duration, 2 to 4 hours." I finished my drink and set the glass down carefully. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt like I should be shaking or angry or something other than this cold, clear certainty. "I want to destroy her," I said quietly. "Not physically, not illegally, but I want her to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Helena smiled again, and this time it was genuinely warm. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been waiting for someone to put that woman in her place for years." She walked me to the door, but before I left, she handed me a business card. "That's my attorney. Call him tomorrow. You'll need legal advice for what comes next." "Helena," I said, pausing on her porch, "why are you helping me? You barely know me." She considered the question for a moment, rain still falling steadily around us. "Because you're a craftsman," she said finally. "You build things that last, things that have value. Your wife is a consumer. She takes and never creates anything worthwhile. The world has enough consumers, Jared. It needs more craftsmen." I drove back to the city slowly, thinking about everything Helena had told me. By the time I reached the downtown area, it was nearly midnight. Instead of going home, I drove to my shop. Solace Restoration occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district. I'd bought the building 5 years ago with money I'd inherited from my grandfather, and I'd spent 2 years converting it into something that worked for both business and personal projects. The shop smelled like motor oil and metal polish, familiar scents that always calmed me down. I flipped on the lights and walked to the back corner, where a 1969 Camaro SS sat under a tarp. I'd been working on the Camaro for 8 months, rebuilding the engine from scratch, restoring the interior, repainting the body. It was going to be a surprise for Zara's birthday next month. She'd mentioned once that she'd always wanted a classic muscle car, something that would turn heads when she drove it. I pulled off the tarp and looked at the car. The paint was perfect, a deep red that seemed to glow under the shop lights. The chrome bumpers were polished to mirror brightness. The interior was done in black leather with red stitching. It was beautiful, and it represented probably 200 hours of my time. I walked to my desk and pulled out the title paperwork. The car was registered in my name, of course. All my projects were. Tomorrow, I'd put it up for sale. My phone had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. I scrolled through them without reading most of the content. Zara demanding explanations, Tessa trying to mediate, Margaret asking if I was all right. Even Reed had sent a message, though his was just a thumbs-up emoji. The last message was from Zara, sent 20 minutes ago. "I'm sorry. Please come home. We can work this out." I deleted all the messages and turned off the phone again. There was a cot in the back office that I used sometimes when I was working late on a project. Tonight, it would serve as my bed. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of taking back my life. But first, I had some calls to make. I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of rain against the shop windows. The cot wasn't comfortable, but I'd slept better than I had in months. There's something to be said for making a decision, even a destructive one. My first call was to the bank. Citizens. First opened at 7, but their automated system was available 24 hours a day. I removed Zara as an authorized user on all my credit cards, changed the PIN on our joint checking account, and transferred most of the balance to my business account. The second call was to Helena's attorney, a man named Douglas Reeves, who sounded like he'd been expecting to hear from me. "Mrs. Trenwall briefed me on your situation," he said. "I can see you in my office at 9 if you're available. I'll be there." The third call was to my insurance company. I removed Zara from my auto policy and changed the beneficiary on my life insurance from her to my sister in Oregon. By 8 o'clock, I'd systematically removed my wife from every financial aspect of my life. It was surprisingly easy. Most companies just required verbal confirmation and a security question. The hardest part was remembering all the accounts that needed updating. Reeves's office was in one of those downtown buildings that looked like it had been there since the city was founded. His secretary offered me coffee and led me to a conference room where the attorney was waiting with a stack of papers. "Your wife has no legal claim to your business or your personal assets," he said, after reviewing my situation. "You've been married less than 5 years, there are no children, and you can document that most major purchases were made with your income. What about the apartment? Mrs. Trenwall owns the building. Your wife has no tenant rights since her name isn't on the lease. Legally, she's a guest who's overstayed her welcome. How long before she has to leave? Mrs. Trenwall can terminate her authorization to be on the property immediately. After that, your wife would be trespassing." I signed papers for an hour. Divorce filing, asset protection, business incorporation updates. By 10:30, I was legally separated from Zara in every way that mattered. "One more thing," Reeves said as I prepared to leave. "Mrs. Trenwall asked me to give you this." He handed me an envelope with my name written on it in Helena's precise handwriting. Inside was a key and a note. "Apartment 12B is empty and furnished. Consider it a temporary office while you sort things out. H." Apartment 12B was 3 floors below the one I'd shared with Zara. It would give me a front-row seat to whatever happened next. I drove to the apartment building and parked in my usual spot. Henry was at his desk in the lobby, and he nodded as I approached. "Morning, Mr. Salas. Mrs. Salas was asking about you earlier." "What did you tell her?" "That I hadn't seen you. She seemed quite upset." I handed him the key Helena had given me. "I'll be staying in 12B for a while. Mrs. Trenwall should have called about it." Henry checked his computer and nodded. "Yes, sir. She called this morning. I'm to provide you with full building access and services. What about Mrs. Solis? Henry's expression became carefully neutral. Mrs. Trenwall left specific instructions regarding Mrs. Solis's access to building services. As of this morning, all amenities require direct authorization from the property owner. Which means no concierge services, no gym access, no guest parking validation, no package acceptance. The elevator will still take her to the 15th floor, but that's about it. I felt a small, mean satisfaction at that. Zara's daily routine revolved around the building's amenities. She used the concierge service for everything from dinner reservations to dry cleaning pickup. She spent 2 hours every morning in the building's private gym. She had packages delivered constantly. Has she tried to use any services today? Henry glanced around the lobby, then leaned closer. She attempted to have the concierge make a spa appointment this morning. When they explained that the service was no longer available to her, she became quite vocal. Vocal how? She accused the staff of incompetence and demanded to speak with building management. When I explained that all service changes came directly from Mrs. Trenwall, she insisted there had been a mistake. What did you tell her? That she should contact Mrs. Trenwall directly if she had concerns about her service authorization. I could picture Zara's reaction to that. She'd probably assumed she could charm or intimidate her way past any bureaucratic obstacle. The idea that she might not be in control of her own living situation wouldn't have occurred to her. Apartment 12B was smaller than the one I'd shared with Zara, but it was elegantly furnished and had a perfect view of the street. I could see my truck parked below, and beyond that, the coffee shop where Zara liked to meet her friends. I was unpacking my overnight bag when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. Jared, thank goodness. It's Margaret. Zara's mother sounded frazzled, which was unusual. Margaret was normally the calm center of any crisis. Hi, Margaret. How are you? I'm worried about you, honey. Zara said you didn't come home last night. She's beside herself. I'm fine. I just needed some space to think. About last night? Jared, I know what she said was thoughtless, but she didn't mean anything by it. You know how she gets when she's nervous. Nervous. That was Margaret's explanation for most of Zara's behavior. She was nervous when she criticized my truck. She was nervous when she complained about my friends. She was nervous when she compared me unfavorably to other men. Margaret, I appreciate you calling, but this is between Zara and me. She loves you, Jared. I know she does. She's always been insecure about money. Her father and I spoiled her when she was younger, and I think it gave her unrealistic expectations. Margaret was a good woman who'd spent 30 years making excuses for her daughter's behavior. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also couldn't pretend anymore that Zara's problems were just insecurity. I need some time, I said finally. Can you understand that? Of course, but promise me you'll talk to her, really talk to her. Marriage is work, honey. It's not always easy. After Margaret hung up, I sat by the window and watched the street below. A white Tesla pulled into the guest parking area, and I recognized the driver immediately. Liam Voss, Zara's Thursday afternoon companion. He was early today. It was only 11:30. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I watched him walk into the building, confident and casual, like he belonged here. He was wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most people made in a week. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Elevator access to 15th floor has been restricted. Guest will need escort from resident. Building security. Helena worked fast. I could see Liam through the lobby windows, talking to Henry with increasingly animated gestures. Henry was maintaining his professional composure, but I could tell he was enjoying this conversation. After about 5 minutes, Liam pulled out his phone and made a call. Probably to Zara, asking her to come down and escort him up. But Zara couldn't escort him up, because Zara was probably dealing with her own set of problems right about now. I decided to take a walk. The coffee shop across the street was one of those trendy places that charged $8 for drinks that used to cost $2. Zara loved it because it was the kind of place where she could be seen, where she could run into people who mattered in her social circle. I ordered a regular coffee and found a table by the window where I could watch the building entrance. Liam was still in the lobby, and now he was pacing. His confident demeanor had shifted to something more agitated. He kept checking his phone and looking toward the elevator bank. At noon, Zara appeared in the lobby. Even from across the street, I could see that she was upset. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. She was wearing yoga pants instead of her usual designer outfits, and she was gesturing frantically as she talked to Liam. They had what looked like a heated conversation near the elevator. Liam kept pointing toward the upper floors, and Zara kept shaking her head. Finally, they both left the building together. I was finishing my coffee when Tessa walked in. She spotted me immediately and came over to my table. "Jared, thank goodness you're here. Zara's been looking everywhere for you." Tessa was one of those people who thrived on drama, especially other people's drama. She'd been Zara's best friend since college, which meant she'd had a front row seat to every crisis in my wife's life. "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm having coffee." "She's really upset, Jared. She feels terrible about last night." "Does she?" "Of course she does. You know Zara. She says things without thinking sometimes, but she doesn't mean to hurt anyone." I studied Tessa's face. She was pretty in a generic way, with the kind of features that looked good in social media photos, but didn't leave much of an impression in person. She'd never liked me, probably because I represented stability in Zara's life, and stability was boring. "Tessa, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you think I'm good enough for Zara?" The question caught her off guard. She fidgeted with her purse strap and looked out the window. That's not for me to say. But you have an opinion. Jared, why are you asking me this?" "Because I'm curious. You've known Zara longer than anyone. You've seen her with other men. You were there when she was dating Marcus. Do you think she settled when she married me?" Tessa was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "I think Zara loves the idea of being taken care of, and I think you're very good at taking care of people." "That's not what I asked." "I know." She stood up and gathered her purse. "Jared, whatever's going on between you two, I hope you can work it out. Zara needs you." "What about what I need?" Tessa looked at me with something that might have been pity. "I don't think Zara's ever really thought about that." After she left, I sat there for another hour, watching the building across the street. Zara and Liam returned around 1:30, and this time they managed to get into the elevator. Apparently, Zara had figured out how to work around the new restrictions, but the restrictions were just the beginning. I walked back to the building and took the elevator to 12B. My temporary apartment was quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos I was creating just 3 floors above. At 2 o'clock, I heard shouting in the hallway. Not clear words, just the sound of raised voices and slamming doors. It lasted about 10 minutes, then everything went quiet again. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang. Zara's number. "Jared, where are you? I need you to come home right now." "I'm not coming home. Something's wrong with our accounts, my cards aren't working, and the bank says there's been some kind of change to our joint account." "There's nothing wrong with the accounts. I made some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" "The kind that protect my assets during a separation." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Separation? Jared, what are you talking about?" "I filed papers this morning. We're legally separated as of noon today." "You can't be serious. Over last night? Over one stupid comment?" "It wasn't one comment, Zara. It was 5 years of comments. 5 years of being told I'm not good enough, that I don't make enough, that I don't measure up to the men you used to date." "That's not—" "I never said that." "You said it last night. in front of people who matter to both of us. You looked at something I'd spent hours creating and called it scraps. I was nervous. You know how I get. There it was again. The same excuse Margaret had used. Nervous. "Who's Liam Voss?" I asked. Another silence, longer this time. "He's a colleague." "Why?" "He was at the apartment today, Thursday afternoon, just like usual." "Jared, you're being paranoid." "Am I? Because I have documentation of his visits. Dates, times, duration. 3 months' worth of Thursday afternoon appointments." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, but she didn't say anything. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. The apartment belongs to Helena Trenwall, and she's revoking your authorization to be there." "She can't do that. I live here." "You don't live here. You've been a guest here, and guests can overstay their welcome." "Jared, please. Let's talk about this like adults. Come upstairs and we'll work this out." "There's nothing to work out. I'm done." I hung up and turned off the phone. The rest of the afternoon was quiet. I spent some time researching divorce law and property rights, making sure I understood exactly what I was entitled to and what Zara could claim. The answer was simple. She could claim almost nothing. We'd been married less than 5 years, there were no children, and I could document that most of our assets had been acquired with my income. The apartment was never ours to begin with. The cars were in my name. The business was mine. The only thing she could legitimately claim was half the balance in our joint checking account, which now contained exactly $200. At 6 o'clock, I heard more commotion in the hallway above me. This time, it sounded like multiple voices, and someone was dragging heavy objects across the floor. I looked out my window and saw a taxi waiting outside the building. 20 minutes later, Zara emerged with 2 suitcases and a man I didn't recognize, probably Liam, though he looked different from street level. She climbed into the taxi without looking back at the building. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness watching her leave. 5 years of marriage, reduced to 2 suitcases and a taxi ride. My phone buzzed with a text from Helena. "Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2? I looked around the quiet apartment, at the life I was building from the wreckage of my marriage, and typed back, "Ready." 3 days passed before I heard from Zara again. 3 peaceful days of working in my shop, sleeping in a quiet apartment, and eating meals without criticism. I'd forgotten how much mental energy it took to constantly defend my choices. The call came on Friday morning while I was rebuilding a carburetor for a 1970 Chevelle. "Jared, it's me. We need to talk." Her voice sounded different, strained. The confident tone she usually carried was gone. "I'm listening. I'm staying with Liam temporarily, but this isn't working. I need access to our accounts. I need my cards to work. I have bills to pay." "You have access to the joint checking account." "There's nothing in it. You moved all the money." "I moved my money. You're welcome to whatever you contributed." Silence. We both knew she'd contributed almost nothing to our joint finances. Her job in HR paid well enough, but she'd always treated her income as discretionary spending money, while my earnings covered all the actual expenses. "This is insane, Jared. You can't just cut me off financially because you're angry." "I'm not cutting you off. I'm protecting my assets during a legal separation. My attorney advised me to do exactly what I did." "Your attorney? You hired an attorney?" "Of course I hired an attorney. Did you think I was going to navigate a divorce without legal representation?" Another pause. "Divorce? Jared, I know you're upset, but we don't need to get divorced. We can work through this." I set down my tools and walked to the office area of my shop. Through the window I could see the city skyline in the distance, gray and imposing under the cloudy sky. "Zara, do you remember what you said on our wedding day, during your vows?" "Of course I remember." "You promised to support me, to respect me, to be my partner. Do you feel like you've kept those promises?" Yes. I mean, marriage is complicated, but I've tried to be a good wife. You called my cooking scraps. In front of your parents, in front of our friends. On our anniversary. I apologized for that. I was just stressed about work, and I spoke without thinking. What about the time you told your sister that you wished you'd married someone with more ambition? What about when you told Tessa that my truck was embarrassing? What about when you compared my income to Marcus's in front of your book club? Each example hit like a physical blow. I could hear her breathing change on the other end of the line. You were listening to private conversations. I was sitting in the same room. You weren't exactly whispering. Jared, everyone complains about their spouse sometimes. It doesn't mean anything. It means something to me. I hung up and went back to work on the carburetor. There was something therapeutic about taking apart an engine, cleaning each component, and putting it back together better than it was before. Cars were logical. They responded predictably to proper care and attention, unlike marriages. My phone rang again an hour later. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Is this Jared Solis? Yes. This is Liam Voss. I think we need to have a conversation. I almost laughed. Do we? Look, I know this situation is awkward, but Zara's really struggling. She's been crying for 3 days. Whatever problems you two have, you don't need to destroy her financially. I'm not destroying her financially. I'm simply not supporting her anymore. She says you cleaned out your joint accounts. I moved my money to my personal accounts. She's welcome to move her money wherever she wants. Come on, man. We both know she doesn't have any money. She's been depending on you for everything. The casual way he said it irritated me more than it should have. Like my role as Zara's financial support system was just an accepted fact, something that would continue regardless of our marital status. That's not my problem anymore. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Zara made a mistake. She knows that. But you're being vindictive. Vindictive would be posting photos of your Thursday afternoon visits on social media. This is just practical. Silence on his end. Then, I don't know what you think you know, but I know you've been visiting my wife every Thursday for 3 months. I know the exact times you arrive and leave. I know you park in guest spot number 7 because it's closest to the elevator. We work together. Sometimes we have meetings. In my apartment, while I'm at work, for 3 hours at a time. Jared, you're being paranoid. Am I? Then you won't mind if I share the building security logs with Zara's HR department. I'm sure they'd be interested to know about these extended off-site meetings. Another pause. What do you want? I want you to stop calling me. I want you to stop asking me to support my estranged wife, and I want you to understand that your relationship with her is no longer my concern. She loves you, man. She made a mistake, but she wants to fix things. If she loves me, she has a funny way of showing it. I hung up and blocked his number. The weekend passed quietly. I worked on the Chevelle, cleaned my shop, and had dinner with Eddie, my oldest friend, and the only person who'd never pretended to like Zara. So she's really gone? Eddie asked over beer and pizza at his apartment. She's really gone. Good. That woman was poison, Jared. I've been waiting 5 years for you to figure that out. Eddie was a mechanic who worked on modern cars while I focused on classics. He was blunt, loyal, and completely incapable of social subtlety. He disliked Zara from the moment he met her. Why didn't you say something? Would you have listened? Probably not. When you're in love, or think you're in love, criticism of your partner feels like a personal attack. She was never good enough for you, Eddie continued. Always acting like she was doing you a favor by being married to you, like you should be grateful for her attention. Maybe I should have been. She's beautiful, educated, successful. So what? You're a good man with a successful business who treats people with respect. You cook, you clean, you work hard, and you're loyal. Any woman would be lucky to have you. It was nice to hear, even if I wasn't sure I believed it. What are you going to do now? Eddie asked. Finish the divorce. Focus on the business. Maybe travel a little. What about dating? I think I'll take a break from women for a while. Eddie laughed. That's what they all say. Give it 6 months, you'll be ready to try again. Monday morning brought a new complication. I was opening the shop when a woman I didn't recognize approached me in the parking lot. Mr. Salas? I'm Detective Sonia Martinez with the city police. I'd like to ask you a few questions. My first thought was that something had happened to Zara. My second thought was that maybe she'd accused me of something. What kind of questions? About your wife's financial situation. We've received a complaint that you've been engaging in financial abuse. I stared at her for a moment, processing the accusation. Financial abuse? Cutting off access to joint accounts, removing authorization from credit cards, preventing access to shared resources. These can constitute financial abuse under state law. Detective Martinez, I'm legally separated from my wife as of last week. I have every right to protect my assets. May I see the separation paperwork? I pulled out my phone and showed her the digital copies of everything I'd filed. She reviewed them carefully, taking notes. These appear to be in order, she said finally. But your wife claims you left her with no access to money or shelter. My wife has access to her own income and her own bank account. She chose to leave our shared residence after I informed her that the lease was being terminated. The lease was in your name? The lease was in the property owner's name. My wife was never a legal tenant. Detective Martinez closed her notebook. Mr. Salas, I have to ask, are you doing this because you discovered your wife was having an affair? The question surprised me with its directness. What makes you ask that? Because financial retaliation is common in adultery situations, and because the man she's staying with confirmed they've been romantically involved. Liam told you that? He was quite forthcoming about their relationship. He seems to think you're being unreasonably vindictive. I almost laughed. Detective, my wife compared my cooking to scraps on our anniversary. She's been bringing her boyfriend to our apartment for months. She spent 5 years making me feel like I'm not good enough for her. I'm not being vindictive. I'm being practical. Detective Martinez studied my face for a moment. Mr. Salas, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of ugly divorces. Usually, when someone goes to the lengths you've gone to, it's because they're planning something worse. Like what? Like revenge. I'm not planning revenge, Detective. I'm planning a new life. She handed me her card. If that changes, call me. And Mr. Salas, be careful. Desperate people do desperate things. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about her warning. Was I planning revenge? Or was I just protecting myself? The answer came that afternoon when Helena called. How are you holding up? She asked. I had a visit from the police this morning. Apparently, Zara filed a complaint about financial abuse. That won't go anywhere. You have documentation for everything you did. I know. But Helena, I need to ask you something. Why are you helping me? Really? A pause. Because I don't like bullies, Jared. And your wife is a bully. She spent 3 years treating my staff like servants, complaining about my other tenants, and acting like she owns a building she's never paid a dime toward. Is that all? No. I also think you deserve better. You're a decent man who's been taken advantage of by a selfish woman. Someone needs to stand up for decent men. What happens next? Next, we let her settle into her new life with Mr. Voss. Let her think the worst is over. Then we show her what real consequences look like. What kind of consequences? The kind that make her understand exactly what she lost when she chose to humiliate you. After Helena hung up, I sat in my shop surrounded by the tools and projects that represented my real life. The life I'd built with my own hands, the business I'd grown through hard work and honest dealing. Zara had never understood this part of me. She'd seen my work as a means to an end, a way to fund the lifestyle she wanted. She'd never appreciated the craftsmanship, the satisfaction of restoring something broken back to its original beauty. But maybe it was time she learned what it felt like to be broken. Maybe it was time for some consequences. 2 weeks into my new life, I was starting to find a rhythm. Work during the day, quiet evenings in the temporary apartment, weekends spent on personal projects. It was peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. That peace ended on a Tuesday morning when Tessa called. "Jared, I need to talk to you. It's about Zara." "What about her?" "She's not doing well. She lost her job yesterday." I set down my coffee and walked to the window of 12B. The street below was busy with morning traffic, people heading to jobs they might or might not enjoy, living lives that might or might not satisfy them. Why did she lose her job? HR found out about her relationship with Liam. Apparently there's a policy against managers dating subordinates, and she didn't disclose the relationship. Liam's her subordinate? He works in her department. She's been his supervisor for the past year. That explained a few things. The power dynamic, the secrecy, the Thursday afternoon meetings that were probably supposed to look like work consultations. "That's unfortunate," I said. "Unfortunate?" "Jared, she has no income now. She's completely dependent on Liam, and he's not handling the pressure well." "What do you mean?" "He's married." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Liam's married. He has been the whole time. His wife found out about Zara last week, and now he's trying to save his marriage. He told Zara she needs to find somewhere else to stay." The irony was almost too perfect. Zara had destroyed our marriage for a man who was willing to abandon her the moment his own marriage was threatened. "Where is she staying now?" "With me." "But Jared, my lease doesn't allow long-term guests. I can't let her stay more than a few days." "What do you want me to do about it?" "Let her come home, please. She's learned her lesson. She knows she made a terrible mistake." "The apartment was never her home, Tessa. It belongs to Helena Trenwall, and Helena doesn't want her there." "Then talk to Helena. Convince her to change her mind." "Why would I do that?" "Because despite everything, you still love her. I know you do." I considered that statement. Did I still love Zara, or had I just been in love with the idea of who I thought she could become? "Tessa, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you think Zara would take me back if I were unemployed, if I lost my business and had to move in with a friend temporarily?" Silence on the other end of the line. "That's not a fair question," Tessa said finally. "It's a completely fair question. You know her better than anyone. If our situations were reversed, if I were the one who'd lost everything, would she stand by me?" More silence. "I thought so," I said, and hung up. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Zara herself. "Jared, please, I'm begging you. I have nowhere to go." Her voice was different again, not just strained now, but broken. The confident, demanding tone I'd lived with for 5 years was completely gone. "You have family. You have other friends." "My parents won't take me in. They're furious about the divorce. And my other friends, they're all married, Jared. They don't want a single woman around their husbands." "What about your sister?" "She lives in a studio apartment in Chicago. There's no room." I walked to my workshop area and picked up a wrench, turning it over in my hands. The metal was cold and solid, real in a way that conversations like this weren't. "Zara, you made your choices. You chose Liam over me. You chose to risk your job for an affair. You chose to humiliate me in front of people who mattered to both of us. I know I messed up. But I can't undo it now. I can only try to make it right." "How? How do you make it right?" "I don't know. Tell me what you want me to do." It was a fair question. What did I want her to do? Apologize? Grovel? Disappear? "I want you to understand something," I said finally. "For 5 years, you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was lucky to have you, like I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection you threw my way. Do you understand that?" "Yes." "I want you to understand what it feels like to have nothing, to be dependent on other people's charity, to have no control over your own life. I understand. I do. Do you? Because a week ago you were living in a luxury apartment, driving a BMW, eating at expensive restaurants whenever you wanted. You had a job, a boyfriend, and a husband who paid for everything. Now what do you have? Nothing. That's right, nothing. And that's what I had emotionally for the last 2 years of our marriage. Nothing. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, but I felt surprisingly little sympathy. Jared, please, I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll sign a prenup. I'll get a job and pay you back for everything. Just please don't abandon me. You abandoned me first. I hung up and turned off my phone. That evening, Helena called the apartment landline. I heard from Tessa today, she said. Apparently Zara's situation has become quite desperate. So, I understand. How do you feel about that? I considered the question. I feel like justice is being served. Good, because I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? I'm hosting a small dinner party this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a few friends. I'd like you to attend. Helena, I'm not really in the mood for socializing. It's not about socializing, it's about closure. What do you mean? I mean, Zara will be there. I set down the phone for a moment, processing what she'd just said. Why would Zara be at your dinner party? Because I invited her. I told her I wanted to discuss the possibility of her returning to the apartment. Do you? Of course not, but she doesn't know that. I understood immediately what Helena was proposing, a final confrontation on her terms, in her space, with witnesses present. Who else will be there? A few of my friends, people who matter in this city's social circles, people whose opinions carry weight. You want to humiliate her publicly? I want to give her a chance to explain herself, to justify her behavior to people who've known both of you, to let them see exactly who she really is. It was tempting. The idea of watching Zara squirm in front of Helena's influential friends, of seeing her try to explain away her affair and her treatment of me, had a certain appeal. But it also felt cruel in a way that made me uncomfortable. Helena, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I don't know if I want to be part of something like that. Jared, let me ask you something. If you don't finish this properly, what happens next? What do you mean? I mean, Zara will spend the rest of her life believing she was the victim. She'll tell everyone who'll listen that you were vindictive and cruel. She'll rewrite history to make herself the wronged party. Let her. I know the truth. But other people don't. And in 6 months or a year, when you're ready to start dating again, do you want every woman you meet to have heard Zara's version of your divorce? I hadn't thought about that. In a city this size, social circles overlapped. Reputations mattered, especially in business. What exactly are you proposing? 1 evening, 2 hours. You, me, Zara, and 6 of the most influential people in this city's social scene. Let her tell her story. Let them see who she really is. Let them understand what kind of man you are and what kind of woman she is. And then? And then it's over. Clean slate. Fresh start. No ambiguity about who was right and who was wrong. I thought about Detective Martinez's warning about desperate people doing desperate things. I thought about Zara's phone call, the broken sound in her voice, the way she'd begged me not to abandon her. I thought about 5 years of small humiliations, casual cruelties, and constant reminders that I wasn't quite good enough. Saturday at 7? Saturday at 7. I'll be there. Friday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Helena had planned, about whether I was making a mistake by participating in it. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to my shop. I turned on the lights and looked around at all the projects in various stages of completion. Cars that had been abandoned, neglected, or damaged, waiting for someone to care enough to restore them. I walked to the back corner where the Camaro sat under its tarp. I pulled off the cover and looked at the car I'd spent 8 months rebuilding for Zara's birthday. It was perfect. Every detail exactly right. every component restored to factory specifications or better. It represented hundreds of hours of careful, patient work. I'd put more effort into this car than Zara had put into our entire marriage. I pulled out my phone and took several high-resolution photos of the Camaro from every angle. Then I posted them on 3 different classic car sales websites with a simple description: 1969 Camaro SS, complete restoration, $45,000 firm. By morning, I had 6 serious inquiries. By noon, I had a buyer. By evening, the car was gone, and I had a check for $45,000. Saturday arrived gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for what Helena had planned. I spent the day working on routine maintenance tasks, trying to keep my mind occupied. At 6:30, I put on my best suit and drove to Helena's house. She answered the door wearing an elegant black dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ready for this?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." Good, because she's already here. Helena led me into her living room, where 6 people I didn't recognize were standing around with drinks and appetizers. They looked like money, the kind of old, established wealth that didn't need to advertise itself. And there, in the corner by the fireplace, was Zara. She looked terrible, not just tired or stressed, but genuinely broken. Her hair was limp, her clothes were wrinkled, and she'd lost weight in a way that made her look gaunt rather than slim. When she saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: hope, fear, desperation, and finally, resignation. "Hello, Zara," I said. "Hello, Jared." Helena clinked her glass with a fork, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight. As you know, we're here to discuss a rather delicate situation involving 2 people I care about very much." She gestured toward Zara and me. "Jared and Zara Solis are going through a difficult divorce, and there seems to be some confusion about the circumstances that led to their separation." One of Helena's guests, a distinguished man in his 60s, spoke up. "What kind of confusion?" "Well," Helena said, "Zara has been telling people that Jared abandoned her without cause, that he's being financially abusive and vindictive. I thought it might be helpful if we heard both sides of the story." Zara's face went pale. She clearly hadn't expected this to be a trial. "Zara," Helena continued, "why don't you start? Tell us what happened." Zara looked around the room at the faces watching her expectantly. These were people whose opinions mattered, whose social approval could make or break reputations in this city. We had a disagreement," she began. "On our anniversary. I said something thoughtless, and Jared overreacted." "What did you say?" asked one of the women. Zara glanced at me, then back at the group. "I made a comment about the dinner he'd cooked. I said it looked like scraps." "Scraps?" The woman looked puzzled. "What did you mean by that?" "I just meant it wasn't what I was expecting. I was stressed from work and I spoke without thinking." "And this was on your anniversary?" the distinguished man asked. "Yes." "An anniversary dinner that your husband had prepared himself?" "Yes, but in front of guests?" Zara nodded miserably. Helena stepped forward. "Perhaps you could explain to everyone what happened after that comment." I watched Zara struggle to find a way to tell the story that didn't make her look terrible. But there wasn't one. "Jared got upset and left," she said finally. "He just left?" another guest asked. "Well, first he threw away all the food, then he left." "And then what happened?" Zara looked at me again, pleading silently for me to help her. But I just stood there, waiting to see how she'd explain the rest. He cut off my access to our joint accounts, and he had me removed from the apartment." "Why did he have you removed from the apartment?" Helena asked innocently. "Because," Zara's voice was barely a whisper, "because the lease was in Helena's name, not ours." "I see. And where did you go when you left the apartment?" "I stayed with a friend." "What kind of friend?" Zara looked around the room desperately. "A colleague from work." "A male colleague?" "Yes. Were you romantically involved with this colleague? The room was completely silent. Everyone was staring at Zara, waiting for her answer. Yes, she whispered. While you were married to Jared? Yes. For how long? 3 months. Helena nodded sympathetically. And what happened with this relationship? It ended. Why? Because he was married too. One of the women gasped audibly. The distinguished man shook his head in disgust. Helena turned to me. Jared, would you like to add anything to this account? I looked at Zara, standing there in front of these important people, exposed and humiliated and completely alone. And I felt nothing. No, I said. I think Zara has explained everything quite clearly. Helena smiled. Well then, I think we all understand the situation now. She walked to the door and opened it. Zara, I'm afraid I won't be able to help you with housing after all, but I'm sure you understand. Zara looked around the room one more time, at the faces full of judgment and disapproval, then walked toward the door. When she reached me, she stopped. Jared, she said quietly, I'm sorry. For everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was broken, desperate, and completely defeated, and I realized that Helena was right. It was over. I know, I said. She walked out into the rain, and I never saw her again. 6 months later, I was in my shop working on a 1967 Mustang when Eddie knocked on the door. You've got a visitor, he said. I looked up to see Detective Martinez standing in the doorway. Detective, this is unexpected. I wanted to follow up on our conversation from a few months ago about your divorce. What about it? Your ex-wife filed a complaint last week. She claims you and Helena Trenwall conspired to destroy her life. I set down my tools and wiped my hands on a rag. What kind of complaint? Harassment? Conspiracy? Intentional infliction of emotional distress? Pretty much everything she could think of. And after investigating her claims, we've determined they're baseless. Everything you did was legal. Everything Mrs. Trenwall did was within her rights as a property owner. Detective Martinez walked around the shop, looking at the various cars in different stages of restoration. Your ex-wife is working as a waitress now, she said. Living in a studio apartment across town, she seems to think you owe her something. I don't owe her anything. No, you don't. But I have to ask, was it worth it? I considered the question. Worth what? Destroying her so completely. I've seen a lot of ugly divorces, Mr. Salas, but what you and Mrs. Trenwall did to that woman was thorough. Detective, my ex-wife spent 5 years making me feel worthless. She had an affair, she humiliated me publicly, and she showed no respect for our marriage or for me as a person. What we did was give her a taste of her own medicine. And how does that feel? I looked around my shop, at the business I'd built, at the work that gave my life meaning. It feels like justice, I said. Detective Martinez nodded and headed for the door. Just remember, Mr. Salas, karma has a way of coming full circle. After she left, I went back to work on the Mustang. It was a beautiful car that had been neglected for years, left to rust in someone's garage until they finally decided it was worth saving. With enough time, patience, and skill, anything could be restored to its original beauty, even a life.